Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking mastering retirement cash flow planning. My name's Christian Allen, and I'm here with Blake Brogan. Blake's taking Rod's spot for us today. Blake, what's going on, man? How are you?
I don't know if I can fill the shoes of Rod the Pod, but I'm going to do my best.
It's fair. Those are big shoes to fill, but I have a lot of faith in you. So, Blake, I'm excited today because we're going to be talking about this concept of retirement cash flow planning. And maybe before we get going, I should give some context for like what that actually means, but also like how I came up with it. Okay, so it's really simple. The whole goal behind retirement cash flow planning basically means crafting the optimal cash flow for your specific situation. We're going to bring together the best of both worlds, the best of both the traditional and the alternative investment philosophies, right? So here's the deal. If you notice, you'll notice this, Blake, or you probably noticed this already. In the traditional world, they always talk about retirement income. In the alternative world, they always talk about cash flow. So the goal here is to bring together the cash flow that we traditionally see coming out of the alternative space with the principles that actually work in the traditional space. Is that all making sense?
It's making sense to me. And I know we got a lot of great content ready to go. So I'm excited to walk through it.
Awesome. Let's start out and just jump into some of the considerations. So what are the primary considerations when developing your retirement cash flow plan? There's a whole bunch of them, Blake. I'm just going to run through them. And then I'm going to ask you which of these kind of are standing out that just kind of pop for you. So there's taxes, asset allocation, leverage, qualified plan analysis, traditional versus alternative investing, creating arbitrage, investment optimization. By the way, we did investment optimization 201 last month and really kind of focused on how to optimize investments across the board. So if you haven't seen that, that might be worth checking out. And then finally, cash flow and income. Blake, what of those things pops or stands out to you?
Yeah, a couple of them. Well, first off, I would say asset allocation. Maybe just to give you a little bit of what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes here, but we're going to run through a case study looking at how you can allocate your assets in different buckets, you could say, accounts that are designed to do different things, and then how that will play out in retirement. So I would say that's one. And then really going back to what you said, Christian, about the traditional world, focusing on creating cash flow. Because at the end of the day, what do we have to do in order to quote unquote retire? We have to be able to generate cash flow from our investments in order to replace our working income. So looking at what type of cash flow are things that we allocate our assets towards going to generate in the future, I think that's most important.
Yeah, I like that. I think those are really great points. In fact, when I was thinking about like what stands out to me, I think it was not those two things, and I hadn't considered kind of the angle that you were taking on it. But obviously we put them in there because every single one of them are important. Taxes can be like our best friend or our worst enemy. If we know how to, create the optimal situation, it can be really good, but man, it can be so painful too. Leverage is the same way. I always talk about leverage being the most powerful wealth building tool, I guess, as for lack of a better word, that we have available to us, but it can also be really painful. So all of these things are really important, regardless of whether you're talking about them on this early stage when you're kind of in accumulation mode, or as you're starting to craft the optimal retirement cash flow plan. Okay, so Blake, let's jump into the actual philosophy and what makes it a little bit different, a little bit unique. Mm-hmm. So and it's simple, by the way. We wanted to keep this simple because after talking with thousands and thousands of high income earners over the last decade, like we've been able to see from our perspective what works, what becomes too complex and, overcomplicated versus what's like that sweet spot that's actually working. Okay, so here's our philosophy, and we really believe this works. The first step in the retirement cash flow planning process is to focus on guaranteed income. Okay, now that sounds funny because like the question, I guess, would be, well, where do I create guaranteed income? We're going to talk about that in a second. But we believe that it's important and even critical to cover at least baseline expenses so that you can be more aggressive with your other investments. So the ideal cash flow situation, retirement cash flow situation, is that let's just say theoretically, my need for income is $100,000, $150,000. Okay. So I want to make sure that come hell or high water, I'm going to have that money coming in, and I'm going to be able to live comfortably at the very least without question. Okay. And then by doing that, what's interesting is it gives us this kind of permission slip to go and be more effective and oftentimes be more aggressive. But again, we're able to do that because we're offsetting that volatility or risk by having that guaranteed income stream in conjunction with it. So again, really simple. We start by creating the guaranteed income streams, and then we move to creating larger returns inside of the alternative investment space. Is that making sense, Blake?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up because obviously in the conversations that we're having with our clients, typically it's in the alternative world, right? That's where we do most of our work. That being said, the people that I meet with don't have 100% of their assets in the alternative world. While that might be their primary focus, there are some very important benefits that you can get in the traditional world. So we're not at all saying, hey, we don't like traditional investing at all. It has a place, it has a role. Do we think more can be done in the alternative space? Yes, but it doesn't suffice for every need. As you said, having that guaranteed income through the various options in the traditional world, very important as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Like you said, it is very rare that someone comes to us and has no money in the market, no money in qualified plans. Like, because of the market that we work with, primarily physicians, dentists, and high income earners, like most of them start out in a job, they make money, and the first place that they start saving is in their qualified plans, because that's where we're kind of taught to do that, right? And then what oftentimes happens, at least the people that we see, is there's kind of this step-by-step progression to where they start to become exposed or interested in potentially doing other things, right? And really what often happens is, because of that higher income, they're looking for strategic ways to be, more thoughtful in the way, more intentional in the way that they're actually placing money. And it goes back to taxes, and suddenly it's like, hey, if I have this big tax burden, I'm going to start looking around for ways to potentially reduce taxes. Well, it's really hard to do that. Like, I can put money in a qualified plan, but beyond that, it's really difficult to find a place to do that in the traditional space. Whereas the alternative gives us kind of a world of, depreciation and things like that. Okay, so let's talk about where we can go to get guaranteed income sources. And most people will be familiar with all of these, but I'll just run through them. Social Security, while for high income earners, it may not be as significant from a proportion standpoint, that's still a source that's coming. And at least for the foreseeable future, I know that it's that a lot of people are going into, especially if you're younger, you're probably not going in with a lot of confidence and belief that Social Security will be there. If you're, 50 or older, there's a good chance that Social Security will pay you for the, the duration of your life, even if it's been bumped up a year or two in the process. The second one, we see pensions. So this one's interesting because pensions are a dying breed, right? Like, pensions are kind of like, that was the original way that America tried to create retirement plans. And obviously what happened is kind of the same thing that happened with Social Security, where the people lived longer. They didn't have enough money going in them to fund for, 30, 40 year retirement. So pensions are a dying breed as a whole. And yet what's interesting is in the high income space, they are actually still relatively prevalent. A lot of like physician groups and things like that will use a defined benefit plan because they have the opportunity to push more money and tax defer more money than they could in like a regular qualified plan and like a defined contribution plan, like a 401k. Okay, annuities. Annuities absolutely have a place. Like, I know that Ken Fisher thinks they're absolutely evil, but annuities in the right situation for the right people, especially when we're talking about longevity planning, annuities can have a really powerful place in someone's overall retirement cash flow plan. Government bonds, those are, never have defaulted. So at least up to this point, we feel pretty good about putting government bonds in there. Life insurance, reverse mortgages, these are all places that we can go to create guaranteed cash flow. This isn't an exhaustive list, Blake, but it's at least the majority of things. Oh, and the one I forgot was income from an inheritance, which, is kind of like hit and miss. But if you're getting older and you've had parents pass away, then there's a chance that you have some other type of income that can come from things like an inheritance. And we see that from time to time too. Okay. Is there anything that you think we should have on there that I missed, Blake?
No, not that I can think of. I think especially those top three are the most common that we see, and then life insurance as well. So 4 of the 7 I see very frequently. The other 3 are a little more hit and miss.
Yep. I think that's completely fair. Okay. Let's move over to the cash flow side really quick. And then we're going to start moving into our kind of case study that Blake's put together for us. So what are some opportunities, some things that we can get from the cash flow side? Now that we have our guaranteed income covered, right? We've got our Social Security and pension in place. We've used an annuity if we needed to cover that baseline guarantee. Now I have the freedom and flexibility to go invest. What are some opportunities? We kind of all know these things. Real estate happens to be the biggest one that we see because there's obviously so many different forms of real estate that you can go to. We've got rental properties, REIT syndications, crowdfunding, and we're talking specifically here or focusing more toward cash flow investments. But again, at the end of the day, because of that freedom that I've got from creating my guaranteed income stream, I have the freedom to kind of be able to go for growth over income. These ones primarily are cash flow ones. We have private equity. We have private debt, which really just means any debt that's outside of traditional banking. That can be notes or whatever else. Royalty trust. This one's interesting. I wasn't as familiar with royalty trust, but I have started to see some information about them pop up, and specifically they're focusing on oil and gas, which we talk about because they can have some pretty significant tax benefits, and also warn people about because their oil and gas is certainly more volatile. So this is definitely one that you would want to only move to if you felt like you had a good foundation in place. And then there's things like collectibles. I put that on there because it's been more popular. I think I mentioned this to you, Blake, but I listen to a lot of NBA podcasts, and they're really, really big on this whole wine thing right now. Now, I'm not sure wine is a great income producer. Maybe it is, but I know that's a popular example right now, so I thought I'd throw it in there.
They like to post a lot of their social media content is in their wine cellars and their collection, those NBA players. So they like to show it off, at least at a minimum.
They like to show it off, and some of them just decided to create a business out of it. So we see that too. Okay. Finally, Blake, more typical things that we see like business ownership. And specifically what I mean is stocks and private business interests. So if I invest in a startup or a venture capital opportunity or whatever, these are all opportunities that I'm investing in an actual business. In a startup, you're probably not investing for cash flow, to be clear. But when I invest with Pepsi, I'm getting a good, large cap stock that probably produces strong dividends. So anyway, those are kind of all ways. And again, not an exhaustive list, but at least gets us a pretty good idea of what are the options that we can go to for creating additional income beyond that kind of baseline guarantee. Okay. Did I miss anything on that side?
No,
we're good.
I thought you killed it.
Okay. So let's move to your case study, and we're going to talk about traditional Tommy and alternative Andy. With that said, Blake, you could take over.
Okay. All right. So put together a little case study here just to kind of try to bring our philosophy into more actionable items. So we have 2 twin brothers. All right, Christian. We got traditional Tommy, as you mentioned, alternative Andy. They are currently 60 years old. So they went to school together. They went to residency together, fellowship. They started a practice. So they've had the exact equal working income. That started at $500K a year at 40 when they started practicing together. Now they're 60. They're both not netting, but grossing 1.5. Okay. So their lives have looked the exact same from an income standpoint.
Okay.
Got it?
Yep. I'm with you.
Okay. So, however, they've invested differently over those 20 years. So Tommy here, he followed the traditional path. So he did what we see a lot of people at least start to do, which is just put as much money towards their qualified plans each year. We had $50K a year going towards that. And then he just said, hey, everything else I can save, I just want to invest in a brokerage account, right? Put it in the market. And he's paying his advisor a 1% fee. So very typical, just traditional investing method.
Blake, I don't want to blow up our case study here.
Okay.
But it just came to my mind that one thing that's interesting on this is what would be more likely or more typical is that people, instead of taking the 50,000, investing in my qualified plan, and then just staying there indefinitely, even though my income's rising, more likely they're going to look for more and more ways to get money into the qualified plan. But here's the deal. Our case study ends up the same either way. I just was thinking about like, okay, if you're watching this and your income, like this could be a very typical client for us. And so if this is what they're looking at, the likelihood is they keep trying to pound more and more money, or at least what we see in the traditional space is pounding as much money into the qualified plans as possible. In this case, you're saying he's just putting the 50,000, and then anything above and beyond that, he's just sticking into non-qualified like mutual funds.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I think what you're saying is exactly right. And that's maybe typical. This basically put this together to keep a little more apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
But I agree
and
with what
I
you're
don't
saying.
think it changes anything. It was just a thought. Okay. Keep going.
Okay. So his brother, Alternative Andy, he read Rich Dad, Poor Dad while he was in residency. So he went into the alternative investing space. So he primarily built his wealth in 3 places: real estate syndications, buying notes, and then investing in other people's businesses. So that's, pretty typical of what we see of people in the alternative space.
And I'm just realizing another thing. And both of them in their own business. We probably should have thrown that on the slide. So real estate, notes, other businesses, and very much in their own business. Okay, keep going, Blake.
There's no doubt. But along his alternative investing journey, he started listening to Christian Rod on the Money Insights podcast, heard about the investment optimizer, how to take his real estate and his notes and investing, added an additional layer of profitability. So he, at age 46, started using the investment optimizer as kind of a foundation and opportunity fund to build his wealth. As his income started to grow and he had additional funds, he began capital avalanche plans. So that's a strategy you can learn more about that we have a lot of resources on. But basically the purpose of that strategy is to put your capital away into an asset that's going to maximize retirement income, tax-free retirement cash flow. So if you're looking to do that.
Sorry, Blake.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say what's really unique is that it adds leverage, right? The only kind of in that it kind of plays between the traditional and the alternative in that it is focused on tax-free income, but it also brings an element of leverage. We call it conservative leverage. So anyway, if you want to learn more, go check out the moneyinsightsgroup.com website and you can find the capital avalanche. It's an incredibly powerful income source, which is why we made it part of Alternative Andy's overall plan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Especially on the back end in the later years of retirement, it even pops even more. Okay. And then the last thing is his brother, wanted him to invest some in the traditional so they could do the profit sharing plan. So he also did the same 50K a year that his brother was doing into that. Cool.
Okay. Actually, I'll stay on that slide for just a second, Blake. So the 50K started right from day one, or right
at
up
age
front.
40.
They're making a good income. They start pushing money into the 401k, and then after the income had grown a little bit, that's when he goes in and starts using the investment optimizer because he's investing in real estate notes and other people's businesses. Mm-hmm. And then at age 46, that's where, again, as we're looking at it, his income is continuing to increase. He decides it makes sense to start putting money into the capital avalanche and continues to use all 3, or I guess you could say 3, 4, 5 of these investment styles to create his overall retirement cash flow plan.
That's exactly right. And the reason we did that is, again, you made this point earlier that's pretty typical what we see. People come to us, they're either in the alternative space or just getting into it, but they did start in the traditional space. And then as their income rose, they're like, what else should I be doing with this kind of stuff? And so,
well, what's cool here, Blake, and I apologize, I just keep for cutting you off, but I just had this thought, like the other thing that could happen is if alternative Andy really wanted to, he could go even more alternative, make that 50K that's been going into his 401k, he could turn it into a self-directed IRA or self-directed solo 401k and could keep doing it. So there's just what's really interesting about that, even though, and the reason I make this point is because even if my starting point was qualified plans, like there's significant value from that, especially if we've got some sort of a match, but we get the tax benefits at that point in time and can do something with it. But just kind of an interesting thought there too.
Yep. See that all the time as well. So that's pretty typical. Okay. So now we fast forward to age 60. Andy, he's got all of his investments up and rolling. He's been doing it for 20 years. He's ready to retire. Okay. So they have a practice that's producing 7 million a year of revenue, and goes to his brother and says, hey, let's go ahead and sell this. I'm ready to not go golfing in your situation, Christian, but maybe play pickleball for the next 20 years. Okay.
Yep. Serious pickleballing.
Okay.
Hey, so I'll be in way better shape if I do pickleball instead of golf. Don't you think?
Could be true.
Well, I guess if I walked the course, that might be different. But anyway, I can't walk the course. That's crazy.
Okay. So they each take 3.5 million gross. That's their distribution. Tommy, again, traditional Tommy's just putting it right in the market. So he's going to net 2.5, right, from the 3.5. Andy, he's going to net 3 million because he has places to put money, create some more deductions, right, from where he's allocating capital. Now, we could also take it a step further and say, hey, if you were doing planning before this and had your business and trust and estate set up in the correct way, there might even be more tax advantages to how you did your planning up until the point of selling the business. I didn't get into any of that. I'm more just saying, he was able to take advantage of some bonus depreciation, things like that, from where he was allocating capital after. So he was able to net 3 million.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, so we played this scenario out, ran the numbers. Alternative Andy, he's easily able to replace his annual income, right? So at age 60, they were making 1.5 each. Now he has plenty of cash flow to be able to continue to not only produce the 1.5, he was getting close to 2 million a year, but he's also able to take that income and grow his net worth at the same time. So one of the things that I see when I'm talking to people who are in the alternative world is the focus is not as much, hey, I just want to create enough cash flow, whatever is left over, my heirs, my children, or whoever I want to leave my cash is going to go to. That's more the focus, is how I can create that income, and I just don't want to run out of money. I see that in the traditional space. The people who are in the alternative space, like, okay, I'm creating this cash flow, but I also want to be generating and increasing my net worth along the way, even while I'm living comfortably in retirement and able to just continue on with what I was doing from a lifestyle standpoint.
Yep, that makes sense. And that's a big deal, by the way. Like that kind of overall philosophy, it's a big deal.
Yeah. And I love talking to people who are in the alternative space, and they're thinking bigger, right? Even though, okay, I might be done working, what can I be doing in the next 20, 30 years to grow my wealth?
I think it's typical. Like, this is what's interesting. We oftentimes see people when they move to the alternative space, like there's kind of an element of this DIY, right? Like it's not as streamlined as I go to my broker and they just kind of handle all my money for me. So I'm like forced to go in and like get an additional layer of education and do more of it myself. But by doing that, it gives me this opportunity to get into almost a different mindset entirely. It's more of a growth mindset, to where your point, right? Instead of just trying to say, hey, I'm gonna use up my money, hope I make it as long as possible, or hope my money outlives me. And as long as it does, I'll just leave whatever money's left over to kids or heirs. But like this whole idea behind creating generational wealth is almost as much a state of mind. It's almost it's principled. And so the people that end up going down the alternative Andy route, this is really what it looks like. It's really this ability to create significantly more wealth. Okay, sorry for the tangent.
But that's exactly right. And that's why one of the reasons I like working in this space. Okay, so I think these next points are really important, because it's going to kind of loop back, Christian, to what you outlined earlier, which is we got our guaranteed money and we have our, investment cash flow on top of that. And how do these interact, and how would we like to see them interact? So on the guarantee side, he was able to take his qualified funds and turn them into a qualified annuity, right? As you mentioned, some people don't like that strategy. In this situation, it worked well because, hey, he could guarantee an income stream for life that he knew he could never outrun or outlive, and he knew it would be coming in month after month. He also set up the capital avalanche strategies, which is, again, going to provide guaranteed income for him. And one of the things that we really like about the capital avalanche, I won't get too into the numbers here, it starts at a pretty low number, 10, 15 years in, but that significantly increases over time. So if you're someone who's saying, hey, I want to be able to not only just have a stream, but also have an increasing stream of income, tax-free income, capital avalanche, great place to look at that. And then, of course, he has some Social Security that he's able to tap into starting at, I had him starting at age 62. So he's got his guaranteed bucket. Things are flowing well there. Nice. And then his two kind of more, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but where he's going for obviously higher cash flow are in his real estate empire that he was able to build up over the 20 years that he was growing that. And then he had the windfall from the sale of the practice that he was able to generate income from that over the next 30 years as well.
Man, alternative Andy, he's doing it right.
He's the man. He's the alternative Andy man.
Okay, well, I'd much rather be him than
traditional Tommy. Let's see how it played out for him, right? So he had his qualified plan that he was contributing to. He had pretty significant non-qualified assets. So we kind of ran a market study back 20 years. What would it look like? And he grew his assets very significantly. So between the two, he had well over $6 million in these two buckets, which again, most people would say that's amazing, right? That is a huge sum of money. He was a diligent saver, and the market performed well for him. However, and this is what we see with a lot of people where they love the big account balance, oftentimes can be in for a shock when it comes time to, okay, what's this actually going to produce for me? Okay, so traditional Tommy goes to meet with his broker, and he gets some bad news, Christian. He says, the broker says that he can only create $218K a year and live safely off that in the first year. And that's going to increase at age 62 to 260 once Social Security kicks in. Now, while that is a very significant sum of money, he was also making 1.5 million the year before that, right? At age, when he was still practicing, he had 1.5 million of income. So obviously his expenses, tend to rise at least a little bit. So last year, he realized he spent 650K, and now traditional Tommy is saying, his broker saying, hey, in 2 years, you're only going to be able to create 260K. So we have a problem.
That's a big shortfall. It's a pretty big shortfall.
So
okay, what's he going to do?
Okay. Well, unfortunately, he realized the numbers aren't going to work. There's not really another option for me. So he says, I got to go. He meets with his broker. He says, I got to go back to work. They decide, okay, we're going to work for another 7 years. During that time, we're going to try to cut our expenses. We're going to pay off our mortgage. We're going to downsize our lifestyle a little bit. And so fortunately, the people he was selling the practice to were very generous and allowed him to renegotiate the terms of the sale of the business to keep him. Yeah, it was to keep him on for another 7 years. So I do want to, fast forward 7 years as we played the scenario out. He was able to, because he continued to make that 1.5 million for the next 7 years, he was able to generate an income of 600K beginning at age 67, and then had a 3% increase. So because he was able to make good money, save more money, his investments still were doing well. It's not like you can't do it the traditional way. It's just going to take a significantly longer time. And he was never able to even come close to the income that his brother was able to generate.
So there is a massive difference. Can I just say 600,000 at 67, most people would look at that and say, that's pretty dang good, right? Like that's really good.
For sure.
And yet, if, and this is the point, right? If the comparison or if the opportunity was to do what alternative Andy does, which is create that higher income 7 years earlier and continue to build wealth rather than spending money down, like it kind of becomes a no-brainer. Sad part is just there's not enough people that understand the value of taking into account all of those considerations that we threw out there earlier, right? Too often it's just about saving money. It's not about where and how and why. And because of that, they end up with a result that just isn't optimal. And of course, today, Blake, we're trying to master retirement cash flow planning. We don't want to do a half-assed job at it.
No, we can't. And I think what I see is like people, again, I was kind of mentioning this, but people love looking at the number because you can see that number growing really quickly in your 401ks, your qualified plans, your brokerage account, right? He had $6 million. So he was loving it. It was going up primarily over the course of 20 years. The reality is it's tough to generate enough income. While it can work for some Americans, for high income earners, right? If you're making $1 million, $1.5 million as you head into retirement, that's a lot of income to be able to generate. And you got to look somewhere else as opposed to just the traditional.
Hey, Blake, let's summarize this thing and then we'll take off for the day. So retirement cash flow planning is different in that we're bringing together the good parts, the best parts of the traditional and the alternative space to create what we would say is the optimal cash flow plan for the individual situation. There's a bunch of things to consider. We looked at them: taxes, leverage, asset allocation, qualified plans. All of these things become really critical. So what do? We create a guaranteed income first, create the baseline. That gives us the freedom to go and invest our money the way we want to. And by doing it, Blake, that we believe is mastering retirement cash flow planning. What do you think?
That was fun.
Okay, before we take off, I just want to a quick promotional item here. Next, okay, so September 14th, I'm trying to see what day it is. I think it's a Thursday again. We have our next live webinar. The topic is smart leverage, amplifying returns with strategic debt. And that's going to be featuring our very own Rod the Pod and Brennan McConnell. So again, that's September 14th. We'll send emails out and make sure we have it posted in the group and stuff like that. So it'd be hard to miss. But anyway, just want to say thanks to everybody for hanging out with us for today. We will send a recording out to this of this. So in the next few days, watch for that. You'll get it in your inbox. Okay. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Okay.